Hey, what up, what up, what up, what up? I'm going to try to get this stream schedule out to you guys here soon. I needed to get this video out. As I said, I'm going to be doing a series of Last of Us 2 videos. So much to talk about. I cannot compile it all in one video. Well, I could, I guess. It would be like an hour and some change, but nah. So, I was just thinking. A lot of y'all know how I feel about Captain Marvel. A lot of y'all found me by way of Captain Marvel and me talking about it. And I had a lot of gripes. But this whole Last of Us 2 or Part 2 thing is giving me Captain Marvel vibes. In a lot of different areas. It's almost freaky. Like, it's just a lot in common. Let's start here. Okay? The protectionism, first and foremost, which is tied into exactly what I talked about last video. Invisible enemies, where people create who they claim are the people that are disliking the game is not like the main block of people, nor what they claim is the issue, that is the folks that have an issue with people more so disliking the game. But what they claim is an issue isn't. Prime example, when the Captain Marvel thing came out and you had folks that were like, well, you guys have an issue with female leads. That was never the case. Nobody led with that argument for the most part. Certainly I never led the argument with that part, but that's what they needed to pretend was true. They had to pretend that the vast majority of people that disliked this game were people that, for whatever reason, had an issue with strong female leads. That's what it was. And if you had an issue with the game, that was it. That was why. That's what they tried to paint it as. On The Last of Us 2, similar thing. Female leads. Now, say what you will. It was, clearly that was the approach that they wanted to go, where the characters and the main ones were women. That's what it was. That's how it ended up. But there's so much wrong with the game in terms of its approach and what people are criticizing. Most people aren't leading with that. I'm not saying there aren't people that have an issue, but I'm saying that most people aren't just leading with that. And that's certainly not the criticism isn't alone the fact that there are female leads in the game. There's plenty of games that people like and enjoy that have female leads. That's just what it is. Certainly in this genre, when you consider like apocalyptic, these guys ever seen Resident Evil, like Resident Evil as a big. I'm not saying this game is exactly like Resident Evil. It's not, but it floats around in a similar genre, and certainly a lot of people don't have issues with. Some people do have issues with Resident Evil, but not because of that, right? So first and foremost is the idea that people have issues with it. But the protectionism, what I'm referring to specifically, is the fact that access media seem to have a complete disconnect with people that are playing the game. And it's so weird how people can play this game. And look, if the game is good, we talked about this on stream, it's not this polarizing. That in itself should let you know that there's something odd here, that it's certainly not as good as what people are claiming it to be, because there's a big time disconnect between, like, if you take a objectively good game, right, fan favorite, there are people that may not like it, but they'll at least concede that the game's decent. They'll be like, it's just not for me, right? Skyrim isn't this, as an example, isn't this polarizing. But you have these access media types and normies, of course, who are giving this game a 10 out of 10, which I don't know on what planet these guys are living on that they could possibly say that that is a 10 out of 10 game. Specifically because of what universe it exists within. Same thing with Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel, believe it or not, on Rotten Tomatoes, take that for whatever way you may, has a better rating than Man of Steel. And I'm going to say that you're on crack if you think that that movie is better than Man of Steel. But complete disconnect, right? You had guys like me talking about and pointing out the issues of that game, that movie and the Captain Marvel, and you had all of these, just complete disconnect from the Access Media type in their reviews, which they act like it was one of the better movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's just like, I don't know how you could have possibly come to that conclusion. Here's why. And I broke it down. I'm not going to sit up here and give all my arguments there. Go look at numerous amounts of videos. I even did one video, one of the better ones, 30 minutes long, called The Unique Shoehorn of Captain Marvel. And I point out exactly how this was something unique. And you get a similar thing maybe with Abby here and her shoehorn. That is probably one of the more similar things about this whole ordeal in terms of the Captain Marvel vibes that it gives me is the Abby character just coming out of freaking nowhere, and they just ram her down your throat as far as they want you to like her. She does some messed up crap, but when you consider the interactions that she has, they try to make you sympathetic, though you hate her. You should hate her. Making you play as her doesn't make sense in the context that was one of the two, dare I say, protagonists that you're playing with. It didn't make any sense for that to be the case where you're playing for half the game. You're playing as Abby. It would have made more sense if you were playing as Tommy throughout the course of this game, Tommy and Ellie. But that wasn't the case. You got Big Mama Pump that you're playing with. Just completely forced into this deal. Doesn't even make sense. I actually thought the doctor was black, and I could be wrong on that. But I thought the doctor was black in her father, that is. And it almost seems like a retcon. But nonetheless, she was forced upon you. She comes out of nowhere and she's forced upon you. And that's similar to kind of what Captain Marvel is, where it was almost like she should have belonged to a different phase. She probably should have been in the next phase when she was implemented, because it made no sense for her to be here. They had to make the movie in the past for any of it to make sense, but it made no sense for her to be there. She shows up at the beginning of Endgame. She shows up at the end. It doesn't really have any sort of bearing on like the actual outcome or anything like that. It's just like she's just there to be there, and it's kind of weird that they kind of forced her upon us. But going back to what I mentioned earlier, the sort of disconnect between the access media and the normie reviewers and stuff like that, and the context is missing. And this is what I was talking about with Captain Marvel, when I was like, you can't sit up here and ignore the issues that's created here. You can't ignore the issues that the continuity issues that are created with this movie being a thing. It doesn't make sense. Shoehorn. So when you do that, that has to be part of your review score, does it not? It exists within a larger universe. It has to be part. I would imagine that has to be part of the review process. But to me, it feels like a lot of the guys that are reviewing it either didn't play the first game, or, like I say, maybe it's an access thing. You grill it, you don't get review copies going in the future if you review it badly. So I don't know. But when you consider the context of the first game, I understand that it's 5 years after the fact, but like I said, Joel and Tommy are completely out of character. Joel specifically, where they get in a situation to get locked in, trapped, and killed by Abby and company, is just so out of character for specifically Joel, the guy that doesn't trust anybody. The guy that ran over a dude because he thought that he didn't trust that he was actually wounded. He's fake wounded. Didn't trust a damn thing. And that was something that he passed along to Ellie, and all of a sudden here we are. It doesn't make sense. It's just, like I said, they had a story, whoever was part of the writing team, they had a story that they wanted to hash out, and they had to give him a death, and they just did not care. They didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't care to even try to make this make sense at all. But that's what I'm talking about with the Captain Marvel vibes, is that you would have had to consider, and people seem to not consider that part of a larger universe. I would argue that if that didn't, same thing with this game, if it existed on its own, I would argue that it'd be even worse. But nonetheless, some people may disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But perhaps the most Captain Marvel vibe that this gives me is reviewers that negatively review this are being called bots, incels, again, with the phobias, all of this phobic, homophobic, all of this nonsense, where they have to not only just paint you as these very, very bad people, but I would not be surprised, and we saw this sort of with Metacritic, where a lot of the negative reviews are being purged. Now, the good reviews that were along, they say, oh, well, it's not enough information, right? It's not enough useful information. But you got people that are giving it like a 10 out of 10 that are just like, oh, yeah, 3 hours into the game, this is one of the best things I've ever played. Like, okay, you left that up there, though. So it like what it does is it forces these, like kind of like with Rotten Tomatoes, where Rotten Tomato changed their entire platform due to critics that weren't access media, like people that actually saw the movie or were potentially going to see the movie, more so the latter, potentially. And you remember that you used to be able to do like okay, I'm excited for this movie, I'm not excited for this movie, and all of that stuff. You used to be able to do that, and then they completely changed the website specifically out of response to how people were responding to the approach to Captain Marvel. Very similar thing with again, that's a protectionism element where it's like a baby to them, and they feel as if they cannot let it get out that there are people that dislike it. So what do? You discredit the people that dislike it. You make the adjustments so they're not being is valued. Their voice isn't as valued, isn't it taken serious as the guys that are giving it the great review. The blue check marks on this, just like Captain Marvel, just completely out of touch. If you're on Twitter, it's just completely out of touch as far as how they see this game. And it's like, I'm just like, dude, I don't understand what game you were playing or watching. Because it can't be the same thing. You cannot sit up here and look at that story and be definitely in comparison to the first one and be like, yeah, this is a masterpiece. You just can't. You have to be completely biased if that was the case, because it doesn't make any sense in any context. Out of place characters, or more so characters acting out of to who they're not, right? And then the ending, oh my God, don't get me started on that. That's for another video. The ending doesn't even make any damn sense. But this is a linear game, and I think people continue to forget that when looking at the fact that people are being critical of it. It's a story-driven game. The story makes the game. And if the story sucks, people have every right to say that it's trash. Because that's the driving force of your game. You're trying to make a game that's like a movie. It's basically a movie. You're forced into every situation. It's just basically a movie. You're trying to force everybody in those situations. You have no options. So if the story is trash and doesn't make sense, yes, if somebody gives it a 1 out of 10 because of the story, no matter how the game and the gameplay, I've seen some people on different ends of it, but a lot of people that I've actually seen play it live are like, this is clunky, like, you know, and that's not unlike the first game. Sometimes I actually thought the online played a lot more smoother than the actual game. the story of the game, right? But hey, some people just say, "Oh, well, it's just the gameplay is great," and then it's visually stunning, which I don't think anybody can deny that. But that's fine. The story is still the story, and the story is the driving force of this game. You can get away with that with other games where it's not as big of an impact, but on this game, you have to consider that the game is very story driven. Now, thankfully, because it's story driven, all you have to do is watch someone else play it, and you can make a judgment on the story, which is all I've ever made a judgment on. I'm not gonna sit up here and pretend like I can clock hours on this game because I haven't. I'm just telling you not to get it based upon the story because I've seen the story. Seen it played through, seen all the cutscenes, seen all of this. You don't need to play it to assess that. You don't need to play it at all to assess that. Again, it's like a movie, so that's their own doing. But man, huge disconnect between access, critic media, professional critic media, be tied to some of these bigger, corporate entity. And just the Joe Blow critics is just night and day. Same thing with Captain Marvel. And what they do, they try to make sense of this. And this is the protectionism element that really gets me going because you can't make sense out of what doesn't make sense. I've seen, even on my last video, people that are like, well, it makes sense for Tommy or Joel to be in that situation. No, it doesn't. Like, oh, well, he hasn't been in war. He's been chilling for 4 years. It doesn't make sense. That doesn't even make sense. That doesn't even make sense. So he lets his guard down. So he's not as, he's trusting again. That doesn't make any sense. First of all, you don't turn stuff like that off, right? You've been surviving for years, man. You and your brother. You have been surviving for years. You don't just turn that off. Definitely when you go on a mission, which is what they did. Go on a mission. If anything, no matter if you were chilling for 5-10 years, doesn't even matter. You go on a mission, you kick back into that mode. What happened to Joel and Tommy? But specifically, Joel being in this situation and even allowing Tommy or any of them put themselves in this situation, that's just out of character. But you get people trying to rationalize with this because for whatever reason, they protect this game like I say, baby, they can't concede that, well, it sucked. And you can't tell me nothing. Like I've said, I don't think there's anybody that can say that there may be a couple of people out there. But there ain't a whole lot of people that can say they clocked more hours on their first game than I did because I played the off and the online. You can't tell me nothing, man. You can't. It doesn't make sense, and I think people should concede that. And if they don't, sitting here calling everybody incel, bots, trying to rationalize with the stupid decisions that were made, the out of character things that happened, the storyline being just a complete joke, just a mess, trying to shoehorn Abby, all of that. None of that makes sense, right? And none of that will change what is. You can sit up here and be mad at folks like myself, that's fine, but it does not change what is. And what is that is a crappy storyline. Make all the invisible enemies that you made, but it's a crappy storyline, and it's giving me a lot of Captain Marvel vibes, and that ain't a good thing.